Also, I've got also back there are business cards just for your reference. There's business cards for me and for Stephanie Clark, who is our records unit manager. So, as if you have specific questions regarding schedules, items on set schedule, then she is usually the person to talk to. I can handle some of them, but largely I'm handing things out there. She shakes her head, yeah. So better to contact her directly because I'm usually asking her. And then there's also some brochures for ORMS, which is our statewide electronic record system. So not related to this directly, but I always like to have some out since we spent some time building them. We're very proud of them, so we have to show them off. So, okay, my name is Chris Stenson. I am the ORMS administrator here at the Oregon State Archives. That basically means I run that previously mentioned statewide record management system. In a previous life, I was the electronic records archivist for the state of Illinois, for the Illinois State Archives, and so I do have a fair amount of experience talking about all manners of electronic records, which is how I ended up doing this session for you. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who here has done one of our records management 101 sessions, either remotely or in person? So a good chunk of you. Good news for those of you who haven't, that's not a prereq for this necessarily. For those of you who have seen that, some of this will be some familiar content. What we've done is I have taken some of the sections in there that kind of got short shrift because we had to cover everything. And so you will see a few slides that look familiar, and then we expand upon them and give them a little breathing room. So there will probably be a little redundant content for some of you, but I tried really hard to make sure we added a lot of stuff to it. This is the first time we're attempting this session, so I've got a webinar version of this coming up in July. We'll see how this goes. I welcome feedback. If you've got my email address out the back, if you have suggestions, questions, stuff you felt could have been done better, stuff you just want to talk about how amazing I am, that's cool too. Any of those things, we always welcome that because we are always workshopping this. Yes, Stephanie?
For those who have not attended the basic public records law training, I have a session on Thursday that is remote. So if you go to our website, you can register there and follow me along on the webcam.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Our favorite thing to do is talking to the void for 45 minutes. That's right. Webinars are a whole new thing. A whole different thing for us to do. Okay, so what are we here to talk about? So the title is a little vague. So what do we mean by modern communications? So I think most people understand modern and what that means is going to be variable depending on when you happen to be talking. So if this was 30 years ago and we were giving a talk on modern communications, it would look very different than this. And I like to emphasize that because whatever I'm teaching you today, whatever we're discussing today, is something that in 5 years we may be teaching something different. Nothing in this realm is immutable. Some of the principles we follow remain this constant, but the way we go about things continue to change. So which is why we're making a new effort here at the Archives to be proactive about our training programs. We're constantly revamping them and enhancing them so people can feel that they're better equipped to deal with the sort of things they are dealing with these days. So, what sort of things are we considering as part of these modern communications we're going to talk about today? Well, first of all, we're going to be talking about email a fair amount. Of course we are. It's not super new by any means. It's been around quite a while. However, that is still the dominant way we are doing work, so it would be pretty remiss of us to not cover that in detail. Part of this would also include instant messaging. So anybody here work in an office that uses things like Slack or Spark for internal communication? Nobody here? Okay. Some agencies are doing that. I know Revenue uses it. I know a number of other agencies. These are systems that often work in conjunction with existing email systems, sometimes independent of them, but they basically are an instant messaging system based upon your actual work computers, things like that. It's not a major part of this presentation. I just threw it up there as these are things that are also included with this. Text messages is something we will be talking about, and I mean both the traditional text messages that you would get through your provider, as well as mobile apps we use for messaging. So things like WhatsApp and Apple, what do they call it now? I can't remember. iMessage, I think it's called iMessage now. I don't have an iPhone, so I don't ever remember. Various flavors of those. Social media also is going to be something we discuss in all of its permutations. Social media is a fuzzy category. There are lots of things that can be considered part of it, but in government we've run across more and more we tend to be using this as a way to reach the public or reach other users of our services. So this is an increasing proportion of things we have to consider. So this is a should be familiar to most of you. This comes from our first session. I slightly finagled a little bit. So first we need to define, before we can talk about records in any form, we need to once again talk about the definition of what we consider a public record, because for all of these things, we're really concerned with the stuff that meets that definition. So first of all, we use a three-part definition to determine what is considered a public record. Those three parts being prepared, owned, used, or retained by an entity, relating to an activity, transaction, or function performed by that entity, and necessary to satisfy fiscal, legal, administrative, or historical needs, etc. of that entity. The idea being that this could serve as a test you can apply to any piece of communication, any document, anything you have in an agency, and could make a reasonably educated decision on whether or not that should be considered a public record. The good news is that you are not required to do that in most cases, because you have a schedule that should have answered a lot of these questions for you. And as we will be talking about, communications technologies do fall within the current constraints of the schedule. They're just not always called out by name. So that's where sort of the nuance comes in. So a lot of these things we're not going to be talking about. The sort of ephemeral, nothing communication stuff that's non-record material is not our primary concern, even if it is in some of the formats I'm going to be talking about. Furthermore, and this is another section there from our public records law, is that this is without regards to technology or medium used to create or communicate that record. So that's the key part right there. We don't care what this thing lives in. We don't care what technology is used to create it or manage it. We don't care if it's physical or digital. The content drives retention. The content drives the value of an object. So therefore, that is the key precept we follow in all of this. Any questions about that? Okay. I should mention that if you have questions, if I jump through something too quickly, by all means, please do jump in. I want this to be a conversation. I know that's tough in a classroom setting sometimes. People don't want to just jump in, but I do not care. Please do, and I'll make sure we have time at the end as well if you have questions then. So let's talk about email. So email, while it is a modern technology, so to speak, it is not a new technology. Email was created in the 1960s in very limited context within scientific technology communities. By the mid-90s, it was the dominant form of office communication. Sort of took over from more traditional means, and it hasn't stopped since. I think there's a lot of places trying to move to something different. Those mentioning those instant messaging services, for example. Some agencies have expressed a lot of interest in sort of doing away with email. This is something in the private sector that's talked about a lot, and they tend to push the envelope a little more than we really can afford to, because we have to be very careful about records management. So this is a mature technology, been used for a long time, and yet we are shockingly behind. We, as a species, as a society, are shockingly behind in how to manage this stuff. It's grown organically, it's become ubiquitous, and yet there is very little consensus across the board on how it should be dealt with or what its value should be. And for a long time, I think with any true new technology, there's often a long push to say this is ephemeral, it doesn't matter. Certainly, from the 80s into the 90s, sometimes late 90s, there was a lot of talk, especially in government sectors, of folks that said, we don't want to deal with email, we're not going to consider it a public record. This is ephemeral communication, it's nothing, it doesn't matter. This is an actual argument that you would still stumble across occasionally. Fortunately, that's mostly gone, but it's been very pervasive, particularly among folks that perhaps were working long before email was really adopted, and they were inherently suspicious of it from the start. This will be every generation. This is not a pointing at one group or another. In 15 years, people will be pointing at stuff we're using now. It's hopelessly behind the times. So, what are some of the problems we deal with? Well, we have a lot of this stuff. We create huge amounts of email because it is, again, our dominant form of communication. It's probably the one thing that crosses a lot of age, socioeconomic, other demographic factors in terms of communication. It's the one technology that's widely used by, my grandmother uses email, so does my friend's nephew, who's 8. It's one of those people understand how to use email. It's become a ubiquitous format. So we have tons of this stuff, and in a government context, we create masses of it. Often we are in situations where control of email from the start has become an IT concern. Not necessarily because they're responsible for the content, but because it's a technology thing, it fell into their wheelhouse, and nobody ever sort of stepped in and said, maybe we should have a little more cohesive oversight of this as a communication technology. So often in the past, and this is lessening, but often we've run across situations where IT policies based upon economic factors and space requirements would control when things are kept or deleted without any real regard for what the value of that content was. So that's a problem from a records management standpoint. There are lots of potential public records. I say potential because, of course, there's also a lot of junk. A lot of junk. But there are a lot of potential public records in email. I do 80–90% of my communication via email because I work with folks all over the state. If I didn't retain my email appropriately, nobody would have any clue what I do. I think even reading my emails, a lot of people would wonder what it is I do. But it's slightly easier. Attachments, sometimes we are using email now as in lieu of fax machines or sending something physically. I know I do. I find it much more convenient. So attachments sometimes are the records themselves. We have to think about that. But it is very difficult to classify content because we use email both as an official mechanism and also as sort of a conversational, casual thing. So we mix personal and private. We have conversations that branch into 12 different directions and don't see anything odd with that. From a communication standpoint, that can sort of work, although I can tell you sometimes it's a problem when you have a conversation going on for a while and you need to look up something that was in the beginning of that, but that's not what the subject header is, it's not what the last few are, and you have to dig and dig and dig and dig. So this is a challenge, and it makes it harder than when we're asked to try to classify this with retention groups. How long should this be kept? I don't know, we talked about 7 different things in this email. I'm not gonna reread every email to figure this out. So that is a real challenge we're facing. So, in lieu of all these challenges, we have a tendency to fall back into our own tendencies. Okay, we run across 2 kinds of people. I would say the top one is more dominant in government, but I used to see a lot more of the second one. So, first one, the magpie, the hoarder. So, they keep everything just in case. I hear this a lot. Somebody might want that. I might need that. In a lot of cases, I don't know what I can safely get rid of, which is a legitimate concern. I'd rather have you hang on to something because you're not sure than just get rid of it all. Nonetheless, this creates a problem because you can't find anything because it's all intermingled. There's too much stuff. We can't get through anything. This is frankly the very real problem with sort of email vaulting programs. I don't know if any of you work for entities where the email is by default just backed up in a big vault, and there's often very little plan for getting rid of that ever. It's not classified, it's just there, which works for a while in the short term, but over time that grows and grows and grows. It takes longer to search through stuff, it takes harder to retrieve it, and the longer it goes, the harder it is to figure out what it is. So this is a major problem. When I was in Illinois, we dealt with this issue. They had been doing this for 10 years, and they're like, our vault is full. We can't fit anymore. We didn't think about this. Help, please. We're always battling storage capacity. Storage is cheap, but it isn't free. And the issue really isn't so much the capacity. I can tack on endless hard drives. I can buy a 3 terabyte hard drive for $100 and cram all sorts of stuff in there. But without a system of control and management, you're never going to find what you got. It's basically worthless. So that's a real issue. We're constantly straining that. I know here we have some pretty draconian email limits, so I'm constantly having to file stuff and get rid of things to stay under that. So person number 2. So these are the people that are like, well, if I don't have it, it can never be pinned on me, right? There are people that basically say, I get rid of everything the second I get it, therefore I don't have to worry about anything. This is, of course, they can't find anything after the fact because it's gone. Poof, done. Of course, the real challenge what these people often don't realize is that it very likely is somewhere else. And it will show up somewhere else, and it will look poorly upon you that it was somewhere else and not with you. This, of course, is a major violation of public records law. I think this should be obvious to anybody. If you're just purging everything the second you've used it, this is a problem because there is stuff in there that does need to be retained for longer. So how do we break past our internal tendencies? How do we actually develop some tools where we can do something with all this? So there's been a lot of evolving thought on email, certainly within the records management community. This is something that has been a huge topic of discussion for quite a while, and it started to coalesce around some what would have been considered heresies in the past. The idea that perfect granular records management may not be necessary or in fact optimal, and in fact has not worked for a couple decades now. So we've kind of moved past we have to do this. So just saying sort it all by the content is not particularly compelling for the average person, nor is it practical. I can't ask every single person to look at every single email they get, knowing that some of them get hundreds a day. Look at every single one and sort it into every single bucket you may have, which if you hold a management position or someone that deals with a lot of different places, a lot of hats, you might have dozens of categories you might have to be concerned with. Even the most technically gifted person will struggle to stay on top of that. And that doesn't count that they have other jobs to do too. They have actual work to do. So that is not an easy thing. However, there is no magical technology yet. And I do say yet, because said magical technology, that being technology that will allow a system to identify your email by the conversations taking place and automatically categorize for you, does exist. It's not great yet, and it's very, very, very expensive. So it exists sort of in the Silicon Valley types, big corporations are getting into it, big data analytics, Google and the like. They have technology that can do this. Is it accurate enough for government purposes? Is it affordable for us? No. Will it be to us? Will it come to us eventually? Yes. We will be there. Whether that's in a decade or 15 years, I don't know. But it's not going to be now. It's not going to be tomorrow. And so we can't wait for that technology. There is no, that him riding in on a white horse and save us from our email problems. So we have to come up with practical, human-based solutions. So things we've learned over time. Less sorting equals greater compliance. What I mean by that is the less things you make people do, the less categories you make them memorize, the less things, the more likely they are to A, want to comply, and B, be able to do it in the first place. So you get less grumbling. People are, you say, you have 15 categories to worry about. They're going to look at you and go, I don't know, I'm just not going to do it, which tends to happen. Or if you say you have 4 categories, oh, okay, I can sort anything. My daughter can count through 4, and she's 4. So, that's not a complicated thing. So that's what we strive for. That's what we need to get towards. Also, email content in a work context can be predicted. We fulfill certain roles in a work context. So while we may all be special, unique butterflies in our private lives, we are, unfortunately, as far as this goes, cogs in the machine, so to speak, within reason. So the idea is that we can predict by looking at your role, by the duties you perform, by the records you touch based upon the schedule, we can predict what your content is without ever looking at the email. Because again, the game is never have to look at the messages themselves. You should not have to go back and look at these things. You should be able to make a determination based upon who sent it. Now, will this be broad and sort of a gross oversimplification sometimes? Yes, but it can work. So, what does this take us to? And I apologize for the sheer amount of text on the next couple slides. I was staring at these things, kept trying to figure out how to blow them up. I'll probably just split them up, but for now, this is what we got. So, who here has heard of Capstone? All right, a solid group of you. Okay, so, for those of you that may not be familiar, the Capstone Initiative was a government memo that was put out in 2013 for federal offices for attempting to get a handle. So the feds are dealing with the same problem we are. Masses of data, trouble to stay on top of it, not good practice in place. So they said, you know what, we're going to try this whole new experimental thing. And in it does say, this is for now. We hope the technology will be better in a few years and we'll reevaluate. But for now, this is what we're doing. So basically in their situation, they're going to say, for top level personnel, your agency directors, your big division directors, people like that, everything's permanent. Permanent across the board. Just going to call them permanent. Because they do touch things of great import. They're dealing with policy and the direction of government, big important things. Everybody else in an agency, across the board, something shorter. Now that determination is left to the agency. It could be 5 years, it could be 7, it could be 3, theoretically. But they're basically all or nothing. It's one or the other, that's it. This has been seen, when this came out in 2013, there was a lot of discussion about that in the records management community. I know it keeps coming up every single year. We get updates on it at various conferences and the like. It has been gaining a lot of traction at the state and local levels just because it's a concept that nobody had come up with. For lack of anything better, we're looking at this. We're trying it out. It's a little too soon to see how well this works. We don't have a lot of good empirical data, but it does seem to be an effective strategy when applied correctly. However, we all have a little difference of opinion, and we feel, certainly here at the state of Oregon and other places I've been, that it's a little bit too all or nothing for our purposes. Because you're really painting with a wide brush there, and you're going to miss a lot of nuance. So there's got to be a happy medium. So what we are now talking about here is what we would call a modified capstone approach. So we're still, those senior personnel, the directors and the like, are still going to be permanent. That's pretty much always the case. Certainly, like the entirety of the Secretary of State's office, the exec staff, they're all the same retention because they deal with the same stuff. They're all permanent for us. Likewise, the division directors. Where that determination sits, though, is a little variable, and it could vary from place to place, depending on the sort of responsibilities they hold and the type of things your agency does. So in our modified capstone approach, for routine business correspondence, all of your normal back and forth work, the stuff that comprises the bulk of what we do, that's based on your position. And I'm going to break this down in a minute, so this is just a little highlight. So we are, however, still making exceptions for things like project files, case files, contracts, personnel files, those sort of things that have highly variable retentions that are based upon that specific thing. If somebody deals with those things, you can't paint with a broad brush or all their accounts will be permanent because it's a constant rolling battery of these things, so to speak. You know, there always are going to be more. If you have an employee file, you deal with personnel stuff, that's, what is that, 75 years? Yeah, 75 years after they've left employment, and that's from here to eternity, so to speak. So those sort of things, we're still saying we want to pull those out. Because we can identify those. Those are clear. Are you talking about that contract? Yes. Good. Put it in that contract. So those are fairly easy to identify. We feel it's not a crazy sorting burden, but it takes away the necessity, basically, to make all of these accounts way over-retained. So here's how we apply this. Again, more text. I'm going to build this up with some graphics or something when I have a little time. But so two things. We need two ingredients to apply this. One, we need a job description, and I know that may be the actual HR job description you use to hire that person, and then also a list of things they actually do. But you know how that goes. So talk to the person, figure it out, and this is something that may be done in conjunction with HR, records management folks, together we look at this. And the second ingredient is your schedule. So this would be the general schedule for everybody, and then if you're a state entity that has a special schedule, you'd also be looking at that. So those are two things. You compare the job duties and the stuff, so this is, again, you're wanting to talk to people that do this, because you may not know, but they're going to know what they do. So a little interview. What do you do? What do you touch? And you compare that with schedule and look at the items they would touch and look at the retentions. And you basically just go down, 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 what's the longest? What's the longest one there? And you might find that the vast bulk of them are 0 to 10 years, and then there's one outlier that's 50. So you may decide that's a special category. That 50-year one, you need to pull those out, because otherwise we don't want to keep all your stuff in 50 years. But the rest of it's going to be 10. So this is not a special retention. And I say that from the context, you do not have a special item. We're not going to have schedule items for this person. You would have to use an internal document about the positions. But this is not something we specifically write over because it's still using the schedule. You are using your interpretation, which you have a right to do, to apply the schedule. It's the same way we don't come in and like supervise your use of the schedule on a daily basis. You are going to be over-retaining some stuff for convenience. So those of you at local entities, that's never been an issue. For those of you at state entities, I know the rules, the law says it is a minimum and a maximum. However, it is a maximum within practical considerations. The same way we don't enforce people purging things the day they expire. Most people are doing this annually. A lot of this is what makes sense. So in this case, we know you're going to be over-retaining stuff by a number of years. But our primary concern with that is that you do have a terminal date. There is somewhere that it's going to go away, and if that is set 10 years out, okay, but that's a rubric, you're following that. It's not just a, kind of forever, whenever we'll think about it sort of thing. We are not piling things to deal with later. And this does not need special permission from the state archivist. So you do not need to, we are happy to talk to you if you're curious about how this will be applied. We're not necessarily the perfect experts on this either. We're trying it ourselves, but we're happy to discuss it with you. But we are not necessarily, and you don't need our approval. We don't have to sit there and give our stamp on this sort of thing. We're happy, again, to look over your stuff if you want eyeballs on it. But we do not require oversight. Yes, ma'am?
Is this something, though, that would need to go in the policy that was just required by that executive order?
Oh, yes. So as far as what's included in the records management policy, for state agencies, the executive order, technically this was a requirement before, but that kind of added a little teeth to it. So the records management policy should state in broad terms how we were dealing with things. So it would be appropriate to include, for email, we are applying bulk rules based upon this rubric, but you don't have to list, you're not going to be listing everybody's position in that policy. Okay. Stephanie?
I'll just add something in terms of like big picture goals. What Mary Beth and I have talked about doing eventually is working with the Chief Human Resources Officer for the state of Oregon at DAS to figure out a way to have some sort of cheat sheet for people so that they can look at the DAS classifications of people's actual positions and find the appropriate retention for that type of position. That's our long-term goal. Obviously that's a big project, and I know that the CHRO's office is rewriting all of those right now. So, you know, eventually we'll get there, but that's our idea, and then local governments would be able to,
Crib
you
off
know,
that if they want to.
crib off of that, exactly. So.
It's an evolving thing. As you know, any large statewide initiative takes a long time, so we're dealing with this a little more compartmentalized. Anybody right now has the freedom to do this, and we're encouraging folks to try this out, to work on it. And it doesn't even have to be something that would be applied agency-wide on day one. You could start with a group. It works just fine in conjunction with normal stuff as well. So yeah, but eventually we would love for this to become something that would be more pervasive, there we go, throughout the state. So I got a couple examples. So example number one, and I totally pulled this out of my head, so don't correct me if you know that some of these duties would be slightly different. So example one, a theoretical agency director. You could think of it also as your city manager or a top elected official, something like that. So duties: directing policy and setting strategy, setting priorities and institutional focus, approving the budget, communicating with the public and other entities, approving annual reports, etc. Many of these things are permanent records or near permanent records. So schedule items, frankly for this case, too many to count. Anywhere from 0 to permanent, and that's why for these sort of positions we're going to call them permanent. This is gross simplification, of course. Example number two, office receptionist. Okay, so duties: overseeing sign-in of guests, managing executive schedules, answering phones, opening incoming mail, booking facilities for meetings, coordinating meetings, a lot of central admin work that has a very limited retention. The schedule items, and these are a few I just perused through the admin section of the schedule for examples: room scheduling records, calendar scheduling records, communication logs, staff meeting records, etc. Retention of those usually between 1 and 4 years. So for this account, we'd say it's a 4-year retention, just like that. And it's actually going to be pretty straightforward for the folks at the very top and the folks that represent sort of the ground floor of an organization. It gets more complicated when we deal with folks, mid-managers, a lot of hats, a lot of different duties, especially if you share oversight over several divisions or departments. So that's where those special categories come up. The exception, okay, so I mentioned this earlier. Blanket retention does not work very well for employee records, contracts, building records, or other highly variable record series. Anything that is tied to not an annual retention where it's retained 10 years from the year created, but in these cases it's retained, what's a building record? How many years past destruction of the building? 10 years after destruction of the building, thank you. Or, you know, human resources stuff, the PERS records 75 years after employment termination. This comes up with student records too. Anything that's tied to an individual project, contract, person, that retention is going to depend entirely on how long that person, that thing, that object exists in your context. So we can't very well set a blanket retention for an account touching those. It's just too much. Now, you may also find in discussions with those people that they don't actually include that in their email content. They're dealing totally, and in that case, you might be able to skip some of those things. But that's going to depend on how you do your work, and that's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. You know, a contract department in one agency may work very differently than in another in terms of where they keep their stuff. This is why conversations with the people there are going to be necessary. For these people, their general administrative correspondence, you're still going to do that homework where you're going to say, okay, your base retention for your person is 7 years, your base retention. And then you are going to need to know that these types of records, and you might have a little cheat sheet for them, these types of records you need to pull out, and you'll have a folder for them. And that folder may be in their email, it may be in a system you're using, it may be a paper file, whatever the case may be. You will identify these and they will be pulled out so you can still treat the rest of that email holistically. And then of course, yes, so I mentioned that, and case file records in their own for independent retention. Okay. Any questions about that broad framework? It's relatively simple in concept. It can be complicated in execution. We understand that. The work necessary, which is why I encourage folks to say, don't look at this and go, oh God, it's going to take us forever to do everybody. Don't do that. Look at one group, 1 or 2 people. Do it on yourself. Just see, hey, I can analyze this. I know what I do, and take a look at the schedule and figure out what yours might be. And it's just, you just chew away at it, you know. And this is something you sort of, yes.
So if we're going to keep like agency directors, to stay with your example, on a permanent basis,
yes,
is generally, like our agency runs on Outlook. So once an employee leaves, a .pst file is created from all of their email, and that's what's retained. Is that acceptable for permanent retention?
So It is not ideal. PSTs are a compressed file format that relies on Outlook to open them.
Right.
Outlook's pretty predominant these days. Not necessarily going to be in a couple decades. We don't know. So when in general purpose, yes, people do often use PSTs to digest sort of thing, but what we would prefer in most cases would be to expand that out and maintain the individual files within a uncompressed folder that would allow you to open those, in those cases they are .msg files, I think. Depending on other email systems might use a .eml. Those are open enough formats, broadly used, that they're accessible at this point. We don't have a better one for emails. You can print PDF, but that's a laborious process that we don't necessarily recommend at this point. Stay tuned on that. We do evaluate technologies as they evolve, but right now, and for short, medium-term retention, PSTs aren't going to kill you, but it's a little, for long-term retention, for those permanent ones, we much prefer decompress that thing and extract them into just a folder or in a system, wherever you're going to keep them, maintain them as such. Okay. So, we're going to do a little call and response here. So, tips for email management. So this is actually in the other presentation a bit, so for those of you who've seen this, you might know this already. Who can tell me things you are not supposed to keep? Give me some examples. Anna.
Listservs.
Listservs, thank you. Yes.
Donuts on the second floor.
Donuts on the second floor. Oh, so many of those. What do you say?
Going to lunch.
Going to lunch.
Calendar appointments?
Calendar appointments. Yeah, to some extent. Yeah, the actual calendar items are a 1-year retention, but the emails that come with them are all nothing. Okay.
A hyperlink to something you want to send us back.
A reference thing, exactly. So here's some examples. FYI, CC's informational notices. Anything on which you are one of a billion recipients and are not the primary, you don't have to do anything, this is not your record, get rid of it. This is a lot of the challenge we face with emails, that for every one email that gets sent out to an agency, there's actually several hundred copies floating around, and that takes up a lot of space. So we don't want that. As listserv messages, event announcements, we covered that. Spam. And the really spammy spam, illicit pharmaceuticals, as well as pseudo spam, stuff that's from organizations you may have talked to once, software vendors and the like. It's not really spamish, but it's kind of spamish. So, spamish, I like that word. I don't think it's a real word, but I'm going to use it. So, it's gotten to the point where I refer to junk mail coming into my actual mailbox as spam. My brain has been completely rewired. Personal correspondence, okay, whether or not you're officially permitted to do so, most people do occasionally. It doesn't belong in there, get rid of it. Articles and reference materials, as Teresa mentioned, whether those are actually attachments or links to things, these are for people's short-term use. They don't belong to stay in email. Okay, who can tell me who's responsible? So for an internal email sent from one person in your agency to another person in your email, who would be the default retainer of that email? The sender or the recipient?
The sender.
Sender, good, excellent. That is correct. How about from an outside source? That should be pretty obvious. Yeah. Okay, so yes, internal email, and this is a rule of thumb, not a hard requirement, because sometimes there's back and forth and you're not really sure and who's keeping it at the end. But generally speaking, the sender is going to be the responsible party. They are the active party. So always ask yourself, am I doing something? Did I create this thing? Outside source, obviously, they're not part of your agency. They're not retaining it for you. You need to maintain that appropriately. Other things we want to do. Purge our deleted items folder regularly. Now, you may have an IT policy in your agency that does this, but you might not. A surprising number do not, including our own. So we need to do that ourselves, because I hope you understand, when you delete something, it moves to that other folder, and it just stays there until you actually permanently delete it, or you set a rule to do so for you. So that stuff is still discoverable. It's still there for you to deal with, so get rid of that. Making useful specific subject lines helps in general just to organize this stuff and handle it later on. This is just a use help tip here. So beneficial for you and anybody else that's working with you. And keep only the last message in a string. You do not need all 25 variants of something that have gone before. Who here uses Outlook? Anybody here use Gmail for work? All Outlook, excellent. Okay, so Outlook cleanup tool. Who here has used that? About half of you. Okay, the rest of you, I got homework. Use that thing, it's so cool. Cool, yeah, your mileage may vary, but I think it's cool. So, strong words. So in Outlook 2010 forward, they have this thing where you hit the cleanup tool for your inbox and all folders. You can choose a specific folder with a whole batch of them, or for your sent file, and it will condense down all the duplicate stuff into the last complete version. It is pretty foolproof. We have tested it. I would go so far as say it is foolproof, not pretty foolproof. We have yet to run across a situation where it got rid of something it shouldn't have. Basically, any variation in that string will be kept. So if at some point someone deleted a bunch of SIG files that piled up at the bottom, and then they continue the string, it will keep the last version that had them all and the last version afterwards, because those are different. If somebody responded to an email using their phone and it attached something as an attachment instead of a graphic in the email, it will retain that separately, because look, it's different. It's a very dumb tool that way, but it's good, it's safe. So as a result, feel free to do this with impunity without real risk. It will condense them all down. I will note that it only does send file and inbox independently, so if you want them to condense the whole conversation, you need to file them together into a folder where they can then be condensed appropriately. But that's up to you. Anyways, it's a really neat tool, especially if you're always fighting with email quotas. You will see yourself reduce your bulk by 30 to 40% often. So if you have a lot of conversations that go back and forth for a while, you'd be surprised how much space you can save. And it makes it a lot easier to find stuff. Yes?
Still won't help if we're in an agency that insists on having archive managers, right? That stuff would still be discoverable in our archive.
Right, so if you are in a situation, right, where IT policies or the administration that runs that stuff are grabbing everything and retaining it before you touch it, anything you're doing is purely for your own convenience at that point. That's true, and that's a policy thing. But yeah, but largely, even if it's not for a records management thing, just for practicality of getting through your own stuff, I still recommend using this because it's extra copies that you don't need, you know, right. So you can really condense your stuff down. Yes?
We found that if you create a search folder, you can create search folders in Outlook. You can do that on your whole inbox. So then all your emails in one folder, and then you can clean up that folder.
The inbox and the search and the sent file?
And then it cleans up everything together. So that's an option. And then to remember to delete your items because they go.
Right, they just document your deleted items. That's correct. They don't permanently delete it, they move them to your. I mean, I want to talk to you about that and see how to do that. I haven't tried to do that. There you go, you learn something new every day.
Yeah.
So that's a really handy tool. If you use Conversation View, which is an option in newer versions of Outlook, it's what Google is by default. It does this already, but a lot of people hate using Conversation View because it's weird to them. So I actually don't use it for work. So for some reason, I exist in both worlds. But yeah, it's a handy thing. Okay, that's all I got on email. Any other discussion on that? Hammered it enough? Yes.
I was just going to add that if people are feeling overwhelmed with where to start with email, you know, obviously you don't want to roll it out agency-wide in terms of cleaning it up, but a good place I recommend people start is just take a look at what departed employee email files you have laying around. That's something that we did when we first got an electronic records management system is, you know, okay, where's our liability here? These are all just sitting there, and that's an easy place to start, and they're not adding more, obviously, because they're not here anymore. So just a tip.
I have content for my new revision.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's true. We always have a ton of dead files lying around, and they take up a lot of space, so that's something you can very easily process on those and give them a retention accordingly, and just say, great, those files are going to be kept for X number of years based on that. Okay, let's talk about social media. So, is social media a public record? Yes, no, kind of, maybe, both. I don't know. Yes, it actually can be. Okay, based upon some things. So, first of all, again, like always, does the content meet the public records definition in the law? So again, is this content meeting that standard? If it doesn't, it's not. So there's always, everything hinges on that. Is the content unique? Because in many cases, I usually ask, whose agency has a social media presence of some sort? Okay, any of you directly involved in any of it? Few of you, okay. So, if you aren't, spread the word. Or if they have questions, route them to me or to Stephanie. So is the content unique? Because often we are using these things, the simplest way to get into social media is you're using it like a bulletin board. You're sharing information that you probably are putting on your website or hosting or putting out as a press release. And in those contexts, identical messages do not need to be retained in duplicate. So keep whatever convenience copy is useful for you. Don't, whatever copy is most convenient to you. You do not need to maintain every version, including the one off social media, if it is purely duplicate. If it is unique, however, or dramatically different from the other things you do, retention is based on the content and function of the record, of course. Most things on social media used in this way fall into that sort of public dissemination press release thing. It's a 1-year retention. It's very short. But that is not all that it could be, so we do always have to be aware. Generally, our posts are of that nature, but other things we do may not be. And I'll get into that in a moment. So, managing social media, we need, and now for those of you in state agencies, this should be part of your records management policy. For those of you in local agencies, it should be part of your records management policy, it's just not a requirement. So, all of you should have written policies and procedures that address the use, access, retention, and ownership of the content posted on your social media. Now, we're using ownership of the records because we know the account belongs to Facebook or whatever. We sign away that when we sign the EULA. But from our context, the information we need to capture. We need a plan for capturing content if we have stuff that falls to a record level. Because even that stuff that has a 1-year retention, you go, well, it's going to be there for a year. Not unless the Facebook bots decide they don't like it. They can purge that at any time, and sometimes do. So this should be something we're all, it's been in the news a lot lately, whether or not government social media should be deleted, whether or not it should be captured, when it's appropriate to do so. This trickles all down. All of us deal with this. It's just much more visible at the top levels. So this is the same issue, essentially. We got a plan for capturing our content. Some avenues have built-in mechanisms, like Twitter. You can download the logs of all your content. Some other platforms may also allow you to do so, but you want to test that. Don't just count on it. Like Facebook lets you do it, but what they spit out is not usable very well. You technically are keeping it, but it puts it out into different folders. The images go all in one folder. The actual things you put in go into another one. They aren't associated. There's no chronology. It's very difficult to find stuff. Not really worth it, in my opinion. There is software that can allow you to capture this stuff. And so this sort of, if you have a heavy using agency or a lot of stuff, you can software, which tends not to be insanely expensive compared to some applications. You know, there's different levels of these things. Some, like Smarsh or Archive Social, I list them out. I usually try to avoid saying specific company names, but there aren't all that many in this space. So these are the two prominent ones that people will almost always run across. They actually integrate with these various social media platforms and pull the stuff as soon as it's posted, as well as in many cases the comments and conversations, so that's handy. Hootsuite is an example of something that allows you to control your content before you push it out. So if your agency has 3 social media accounts, you type in the stuff into Hootsuite and it then posts as a proxy user on your pages for you. So you're controlling it before it goes out, whereas these others are capturing it as it goes out. So different varieties used for different things. There are others out there. So fortunately, this is a segment there's a lot more out there than there used to be. So there are tools available. However, maybe you don't want to pay money for that stuff. Maybe you don't want to do it. Well, there are options. If you're a fairly light user, you can take screenshots. Screenshots work. We don't need the dynamic flavor. We just need the content. You can also compose and control locally. So if you're going to put out a release or put out a thing on your page, compose it in Word. Save the Word document. Treat that as your primary copy, and anything else then is duplicate. So whatever's going to work. Yes?
Except when people comment in the response.
I'll get to that in a second. I will show you. Okay. Common questions. Okay. Can we moderate our page? Yes, but be judicious with it. This is not so much a records management statement as just in general. You are allowed to, but you want to make sure you have a documented moderation policy. I would advise posting that as part of your page so the public is aware of it. And follow it consistently. You do not want to have the appearance of capriciously deleting one thing and not the other of the exact same type. So you want to be very consistent with your application of these moderation policies, and they should be legitimate. Just because you don't love what somebody had to say, whether or not that's, I would avoid going purging things because of that. However, if they're saying something inflammatory, hate speech, foul language, whatever your policy states, you absolutely, you may get rid of that any more than if somebody had posted some nasty messages on your door, you know? Are comments also records? Not necessarily, but they might be. So gray areas, sometimes people take a bulk approach and say, yeah, we're going to capture it all. Safer that way. If you're a light using agency that doesn't get a lot of comments, you might choose to just check them periodically. So definitely yes, if an agency responds or takes action based upon those. So if you have a public works department and somebody says, there's a giant pothole on 15th Street, and you then follow up on that and do that, you're going to want to keep that as part of the record of that. If you engage in a conversation with somebody, well, now you're disseminating information. You better capture that. So, however, if somebody says, cool picture, it's not really important. And you will get a lot of those, hopefully, a lot of those sort of things, and not so much of the more inflammatory types. You'll probably get both. You have to make a policy that's going to fit you on that case. Sometimes a blanket policy to grab them all is safer. So again, a lot of this is not super long retention in most cases. However, on the conversation front, what about private messages? So a lot of these platforms have a private messaging service which basically acts like email. but it's not email that you control. It's email within that application. So, same as in the correspondence, we need to treat it accordingly. Generally speaking, we really encourage you to try to route that conversation to a government-controlled system as soon as possible. So that might mean asking them to go ahead, taking their comment, and then asking them to please contact you at X, or asking them to provide you with a phone number or an email address via the private message so you can respond back to them, so as to limit the amount of content you're putting out on an uncontrolled platform like that. We understand sometimes these will happen. In those cases, it is up to you to go ahead and capture that conversation. Again, whether it be a screenshot or whatever, make sure you're capturing the content of that conversation appropriately. Any questions about social media? I'm glad to see generally a higher level of literacy on this than even a couple of years ago. I think people are getting more aware of it. But we just always want to make sure that people are jumping into these things with their eyes open. You're not adopting. People tend to go, oh, everybody has a Facebook page, we should have a Facebook page, without any real plan on how they were going to manage that thing. Okay. I love that picture. Okay. If I had a really young audience, they'd all look at me confused at this one. But so, mobile devices, a complicated world in which amongst themselves, and they encompass issues surrounding the data governance and social media and messaging services and email and all these things in one handy little thing. So, mobile devices and records, let's talk. So, they are a dynamic communications platform. Of course they are, constantly adapting, always touching things in a billion different ways. What we have seen is that both financial and employee desire considerations have driven the bring your own device expansion. So how many here have use a cell phone as part of their job? How many of those people have a government issued device? In this case, more than normal. Do you know if your agency has a bring your own device policy? Anyone? Some? So there's two very different schools of thought on this. So used to be the only people that had, work cell phones would work cell phones. And then sometime, I don't know, in the early mid-2000s, people were like, people want to use their own phone. It's expensive for us. We're just going to go ahead. Maybe we'll give our employees a stipend or whatever else for it, and they're going to let them use their own. And then the information security guys stepped in a few years later and went, wait a second, this is a major liability. We can't let all this. There's been a backlash. I had somebody at a conference 2 years ago tell me that BYOD was dead, and I was like, that's a little hyperbolic, because no, it's not. However, there has been a big pushback because this represents a very serious challenge to controlling government data, essentially. So, most places now, many places now, operate in sort of a hybrid environment. Some people have bring your own device, or an environment where we don't have necessarily an official policy, but some people end up using their cell phone because they're traveling around. When I'm on the road, that's what I use to communicate. So we have potential issues, of course. Uncontrolled environment for public records. So especially if it's somebody's personal phone, we don't have direct access to that. It's a problem, what they might be doing in there. Personal and public work get intermingled in many cases. They're using the same mechanisms for both, which creates a challenge for handling this. And certainly for the user, opens you up to potential subpoenas, seizure of your device, all those sort of fun things. It is difficult to capture after the fact. Those records being the communication records coming from it, they may not exist on the phone after it, or they may be only on the phone, and then you have to physically grab them and download them or copy them or whatever else. So specifically, let's talk about text messages and messaging apps. So who holds the messages? Not you. It's going through a server, bouncing around somewhere that may or may not be encrypted. They may or may not keep it, depending on the service you're using. Some of them make their money, basically, so to speak, on the fact that they don't release that data. It is gone the second you send it. How long is it kept? Totally up in the air. Not very long, typically. So generally speaking, first defense on this is have a policy governing appropriate use of these devices and what you're going to allow and not allow. Are policies foolproof? Absolutely not, but they're the starting point. We recommend using these sort of short messaging systems for what I call big conversations, policy discussions, in-depth evaluations of the new applicant. So the example being, if I text Stephanie and say, so what time is that interview again? Okay, or what was the person's name again, or whatever. That's ephemeral, short-term, remind me of this thing sort of information, not concerned. However, if I said, I liked applicant number 2, I felt she was very strong in these 3 categories. She was weak over here, but I think we can overcome that. Now, that is substantial conversation that relates to whether or not this person may get hired. That's a real record. So now I have gone over into that, what I call big conversation category, and we have to worry about capturing it. We like a policy that states substantive business-related discussions, or something like this, it's a little clunky, are not to take place via SMS, that's short messaging system, text messages, or other mobile messaging apps. We want to set basically what is appropriate and what is not. Is this a 100% policy? No, usually there's going to be gray areas. However, going along with that, what do we do when the policy clearly isn't enough? Because I've had people say, no, I need to use this, we can't get around this. We do have to have conversations. It particularly comes in when you're working with the public. So I have talked to an agency that deal with at-risk youths, and they are directly, people that work for the government agency are basically counselors and the like, are contacting these kids through sex. You're not going to convince the kid to email you through a government account. Are you kidding me? Dinosaurs, all of us. So they're going to text you. They're going to use what they use, and this is important stuff. So in those contexts, yeah, that policy is clearly not going to apply. They can't do that. There have to be exceptions. So what do we do in that scenario? Well, if this is an occasional thing, such as in my case, occasionally I have conversation that bleeds over a little bit into something that I think is a little too big, and I manually forward those onto my email account to make sure they are in my, now that's a clunky way to do it. It's kind of a pain, you have to do it on every individual message, but it works, and that's sufficient for our purposes, and you retain the one within your email. You can set up an auto CC on your messages to do the same thing. In most things, you can say every message I send automatically CCs. However, that's not great if you're doing this to your home phone or your personal phone, and you're also doing that, and everything's getting sent to your work email. Not necessarily ideal. So that works better on purely work phones, of course. If those are not sufficient, guess what? There's software. There's always software. This is actually, mobile device management is a sector of software that really didn't exist a few years ago. So it's really cool that it does. I am not an expert on it. I've started to dabble into it. We've talked to folks about it within our own agency. But what this stuff does is allows you to centralize control content on various devices. So mobile device management, basically coordinated management of various devices used for work. And that can be applied towards phones, tablets, even laptops. Basically anything you would think of that leaves the office you carry around with you that your IT administration might be concerned. It's being driven largely by security concerns, but records management, fortunately, can get tacked into that. So the idea being allows them to centralize control and capture content, regardless of where you are with the device. Examples of what this sort of software can do: it can provide controlled messaging apps, aka you can use this application that we have vetted or we have a sync with, and therefore if you use that application, it's going to get copied home, but if you use your other one, it won't. Again, we're asking the employee to do the right thing here, but I think most employees do want to do the right thing. This is not, the bad actors, quote unquote, are pretty rare, and there's not a lot we can do to prevent those ahead of time and this sort of stuff. But what we can do is provide them an avenue so most employees can do it properly. So you give them a messaging app, use that one, that will automatically copy home, and you're covered. You can create a public and a private partition on phones. So this is helpful, particularly on a private device being used. So it can basically create a partition, and stuff on this side is government and is treated one way, and stuff on this side is private. Going along with that, you can do an automatic copy home, a remote wipe. This is what IT guys are usually worried about. So you lose your phone and go, there's a lot of stuff on there. They can basically log, the next time it logs into the network, they can have it wipe the content remotely. So that's a big thing. It can also, some of these can also allow you to maintain separate phone numbers. Basically, one's like a virtual phone number, an internet phone number, that would allow you to have a work phone number and then your normal phone number. So an elegant solution to having that whole public-private thing on one device. And there's other things too that I don't even know about yet. So a lot of these can kind of get around the whole employees being resistant to letting you, now they do require employees letting you get on their device to install these things. I mean, that's part of the thing. That would be part of an intelligent BYOD policy. But if you want to use your own phone, you may, but you have to let us install this, and so you have your partition or whatever else. Or you can't use your phone for, that sort of thing. So there are ways to do this, but again, it's worth looking into if this is a large-scale issue for you, if you have a lot of folks using their phones and this seems to be a concern. Yeah, there's money involved, there always is, but I think the actuaries and the lawyers would tell you, the risk management approach would say, how big the risk and how expensive would that potentially be versus the cost of the software. And I think usually most folks feel it's probably worth it at this point. Any other questions on that? Pretty quick, I just wanted to sort of introduce it. Last little bit. So, see, we're right about an hour. That's what I was hoping to be. So, I think the overall theme here, regardless of the specific technology, starting over. Regardless of the specific technologies we have discussed here today, or I have discussed and you've listened to, I guess, we want to build a framework for adapting to new technology, whatever it may be. Because what we're using now won't necessarily be what we're using in 10 years. So, like a lot of things, we try to make it technologically independent. So, communications will continue to evolve. That's inevitable. We will be using, so no matter how easy it is to sort of discount something new as, whatever, but whatever your 12-year-old daughter is using right now, we will be using in a few years once it's no longer cool. That is simply the truth of it. So nothing, I try not to poo-poo any new thing, because I wouldn't think it would have a government application, and lo and behold, it does. So, or somebody tries to give it one. We don't know what will be used in a decade. We can't predict that. But like anything in this realm, it's a matter of being prepared and having a decision-making framework. And records on any new technology are always an afterthought. They never think about it. It's about facilitating work and facilitating communication first. The records part is rarely part of the software development cycle. It's rarely part of it, and I would say rarely, almost never. So we have to do the thinking for these things. So what can we do? Always ask, what about the records? Whether that's us or anybody else, this is a question that should always be asked when we're looking at any new technology. Would this thing contain records? What would be the potential value of those records? Is there a plan for getting things out of there? Can it be managed, in situ, or do we have to pull them out? All those sort of permutations. How might we handle that? Think about the appropriate usage of a technology. Try not to just say, it's useless, but try to say, what could we use this for? What might be the limitations? What maybe is a bridge too far for us? What is not appropriate? Just because it can do that thing might not be something we want to use it for in a government context. And a lot of this, plan for the creation, capture, and retention of records before you're in the thick of it. This is where we find ourselves today with a lot of technologies that were adopted within the last decade. Well, they're here. We've already got them. Now we have to go back and do all this extensive work to try to work our way back into the process. But going forward, records should be part of the discussion in the purchasing process. This is part of something that should always be involved. I always say we should have, and this is in the other presentation, the whole idea that you should have administration, legal, records management, and the team touching the thing, and IT involved in any discussion about new application, just to make sure everybody says, yay or nay on this. Are the records here? Yes, no. Okay, then we need to figure out what we're going to be doing with them. Are they going to live there their whole lives? Are we extracting them out? All that sort of stuff. And this is the question also to put the hard question to the vendor up front. And they will sometimes try to worm their way around it. Well, you can sort of, and a lot of them will say, it will live happily in our world the whole time. That's not always a great answer. So we sometimes have to push a little bit. Okay, great, but can we export? I know that's not what you want to, can we do it? Can we do it? Keep looping that conversation back. So this is important. So, this is Stephanie, this is me. You can ask questions of either of us, but again, depending on what they are, we may just go ahead and forward it on to the other. Questions regarding records management in general, the laws and policies, the schedules. Stephanie is the expert on that stuff. I know just enough to be slightly above average. I am happy to answer questions you might have about technology, about electronic records in general, some of these, the capstone stuff, any of these things. I'm not a wizard with this stuff, but I've spent enough time thinking about it that maybe I can provide you some insight. But we're always happy to answer. I've got business cards for both of us in the back as well as brochures for our system I mentioned earlier. Do we have any questions? Yes?
Is there any consideration for how we're capturing content that we put on Oregon.gov?
So, generally speaking, content posted to any sort of government portal, a website or anything like that, is generally redundant content because you're maintaining a copy in the background somewhere. Generally, that's how the retention would go. The agency creating the stuff is still responsible for retention in-house, and that is simply a portal for people to access, so it is a duplicate copy. If you have any sort of situation where by putting something somewhere you are literally relinquishing control of that object, that's something we need to discuss, or it should be discussed to say, is this being maintained there? Generally, I've not run across that, but I don't know enough about your specific mechanism to give you a full answer on that. Maybe.
So what I'm thinking of is more like page content, not necessarily the PDF that you upload
Oh,
to
you're talking about the website itself.
But yeah, when you're creating your page and putting content there,
Yeah.
you don't normally have
Yes.
those paragraphs.
Right, so the HTML code itself, the actual look and feel of the page, right. Screenshots can be appropriate in some contexts. A lot of the stuff, though, that go around the website is not necessarily a scheduled record because it's navigation information, it's context for the stuff that is on the page. If you have specific questions about, can you give us an example of a page or two, and then Stephanie could look at that and say, yeah, that looks like it would just be this redundant information. A lot of it is, if this is redundant information that exists inside of other records, it's not necessarily worthy of its own thing, even if it is different formatted or anything like that. It's the same information content. So, usually not the case. I think often cultural collecting institutions are more concerned about capturing websites for the future and looking at things, but from a plain Jane government standpoint, we're not nearly as concerned about the specific look of the page on a specific date, with a few exceptions. Largely, we just want to make sure that the critical information content has been retained appropriately.
Okay.
Yes.
Photographs. Is it
What
only,
about
is it only something you worry about if you add metadata to it, like a caption?
No, I mean, photographs absolutely can be a record the same way anything else can be. In the same way that, photographs of the company picnic, not so much, but photographs documenting something, if you're doing an site inspection, depending on the sort of work you do, yeah, absolutely, lots of things, surveys and things. And those photographs should be, like anything else, extracted into a central server or something. They shouldn't live solely on the device. And similarly, once they have been moved to an appropriate place, a permanent storage location or not, whatever the case may be, they should be purged from the device as soon as it's equitable, just because they, I know that's hard to control. That purely is not, it's not an illegal thing, that's purely a, if you destroy them appropriately, you now have uncontrolled copies that still exist and are discoverable, potentially. It opens you up to some liability from that standpoint. It's not so much a retention issue as it's an access issue.
Okay.
Advise against it, but yeah, we know.
A lot of times they're associated with a project, and that's where they would go.
Right, yeah, as far as the scheduling of them, they would go with whatever record series would be appropriate. They don't have their own classification per se, they would simply go in with the other documents relating to that thing.
The one thing I can think of that might be different than that, we don't have it yet, Teresa, I don't know if Westland does, is body cameras. And if a crime is committed, then it's a different story
I can talk about that.
Than if a crime is not committed.
Right, so that's actually something we have, our law enforcement centered one we've done includes information about that. So body cameras, security cameras, dash cams, anything like that, they all have a blanket 30-day retention for non-evidentiary stuff. So stuff that documents nothing, it was running and everything, it's a 30-day rotating sort of thing. However, anytime it is pulled for an investigation or there is evidence of something that has been pulled, that is pulled out and kept with the case file as its own thing. The rest of the material can be purged, normally, but you excise the portion that matters, and then that is retained as appropriate. With that, it just tags along with the rest of the stuff. All right, well, I appreciate everybody being here. Again, we welcome feedback. You have our email addresses, and other things you'd like to see included. Suggestions for future such trainings. We're trying to expand our roster of these things. I will be doing this one again via webinar in July 19th. So if you have colleagues that weren't able to make this one and might be interested, we'll be doing it then, and you can go to our website and sign up via iLearn, same way you did this, but this time you'll be able to get in the first time. Actually, that one, at this point, that has a maximum of 50 people, and I think I've got 40 for it right now. So if we have a lot of interest and we get capped out, we'll go ahead and schedule another one maybe for August or sometime. So, and then, yeah, any other topics you'd like to see covered, please let us know and we'll take a look and see what we might be able to put together for future trainings. Thanks, everybody.